Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Marie Palacios. We know Marie through Mandy Pierce, who many of you know. Mandy's been part of AFP for a long time and on the board. And Mandy and Marie have a business together, an organization together called Funding for Good. And I don't know if you've ever checked out their website. Their website's great with wonderful resources. And so months ago when Mandy was on the board with me, we were talking about strategic planning, and she said, oh, I know who has to do that. So you can thank Mandy for Marie being here. So I'm going to turn this over to Marie. I thank you for coming, and this little microphone thing is new, and if it seems really garbled, and you need to let us know if it's working for you. If it doesn't work, put your hands up and Marie can just shout.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And while I'm getting this connected so I'm not holding it like an ice cream cone, I'm going to go ahead and pass this around. We're going to multitask. This is just a little handout for you all today. I'm going to do some testing. Can you hear me? No? Now can you hear me?
Not through the microphone.
I'll turn it up. Okay. Testing, testing.
It's not through the microphone.
It has to be really close to your mouth, unfortunately.
Testing, testing.
No, it's just off.
Okay. That's a very big possibility. This is why you hand out. All right, now testing, testing. Okay. That better?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to have to be careful. Are you moving it around?
I am.
Okay, I was going to say, if I can't move, we're going to be in trouble today. I did a lot. All right. Testing, testing. Is that working for everyone? Well, it is great to be here with you all today and sharing a little bit about a topic that is one of my favorites in the nonprofit and just business development world. We only have a short amount of time today, so when I was told that strategic planning was the topic of choice, I was like, oh, we get 3 hours. No, 30, 40 minutes. So this is going to be a cursory view. I know that many of you in this room could stand up and teach this, probably better than I can. Some of you, this might be your first experience. So I'm hoping that no matter what your experience or your background is with strategic planning, that you will find something helpful. And if it's not something I say, then maybe it's a resource I share or some of the conversations that you have afterwards. So we're going to dive into strategic planning, and if you have any questions, comments, anything to contribute, feel free to do so. So most of you know Mandy. She's there on the right of your screen. And as Kim said, Mandy and I've partnered for over 15 years. We both actually own our own businesses. I own MP Pro Consult, and part of my services include diversity trainings, cross-cultural solutions. And Mandy is the owner of Funding for Good. But we have a unique partnership. And a lot of people think only nonprofits partner, but that's not the case. For-profits should be partnering just as well. And our business relationship is a good example of that. And our business relationship is actually included in our own business plans or strategic plans because we realized that we work better together, so we included in our own strategic planning. So what is a strategic plan? If I ask you all, and that's one really loud, if I ask you all, for you all in the room, what is a strategic plan? Without looking at the slide. Shout it out.
Where do you want to be 5 years from now?
Where do you want to be 5 years from now? So it's kind of a destination. What else?
Roadmap.
A roadmap. Our preferred definition is that it is a roadmap for an organization. It tells you where you're going to go and how you're going to get there. One good example of this is, let's just say I look at everyone in this room and I say, okay, we are going to meet in California on December 1st, and we are going to have this amazing philanthropy day. You're all going to get there. Now, Jim over here might decide he's going to take the scenic route, and he's going to drive, and he's going to visit the Grand Canyon, and he arrives in LA on December 1st. Whereas Wilson might say, you know what, I need a direct flight. I'm going to be there in 3 or 4 hours. So I'm leaving that morning, and I'm going to head out there, and I'm going to end up in San Francisco. Every single person in this room could choose a different way to get to California on December 1st. And even though we have the idea of that destination, how we get there and when we get there and if we're getting there together is still left up for grabs. So strategic plan makes sure that all of you in your organization and your community get to the same destination using the same roadmap. Because if someone happens, this is cutting in and out.
Maybe if you move it up an inch or two,
I'll try that.
that might help a little bit.
So if you are, is that better? We'll see. If not, I can hold it. No?
A little higher.
All right.
I think so.
So if you are a board of directors and you're going to be doing the strategic planning process, it's very important to outline. Y'all said this might have problems today. It looks like I'm going to be holding it. So it's very important to outline not just the destination, but how the board, how the staff, how the organization is going to work together. Because let's say I'm going to meet you in California and I have a flat tire. If there's no one around to help, then no one knows I've been delayed. It can impact, the travel. But if you as an organization come up with a roadblock, someone here was saying that they had a strategic plan and then they were told, oh, and by the way, you need to add this. You can make those decisions jointly. So strategic plan is a live document. Most of the time when I walk into a nonprofit and say, do you have a strategic plan? They say, I think so. If you don't know so, that's the first indication that there might be a problem. And usually I say, where is that strategic plan? Oh, it's there collecting dust on the shelf with my bylaws. That's probably not the best place either. A strategic plan should be a live document. We're in the Bible Belt. It should be your Bible for your organization. You should be pulling it out. You should be reporting on it at your monthly board meeting. So it is a roadmap, but it's not just a map. It's your GPS, it's your travel plans, it's your itinerary. So nonprofit is our status. This should not be our operating model. And this is a saying by Elizabeth Brazos, who's probably a well-known member of the community here in Western North Carolina. If you don't have a strategic plan, can you imagine as a business starting up Starbucks or Walmart or any of these businesses saying, we are going to open our doors, but we don't have a plan for the future? Nonprofits do this all the time. They said, we'll figure it out as we go. We're organic. We're responding to the community needs. At the end of the day, nonprofits are a business. And balanced budgets are really kind of a thing of the past in the sense that you don't want to be scheduling a budget or making a budget that ends in zero and leaves you no flexibility. So remember that you're a business, and just as a good business would have a strategic plan, a nonprofit needs one as well. So shout out, I'm not going to go through every single one of these because you all are intelligent professionals in the field. What are some of the kind of why it's important? You talk about what it is, but why is it important?
So you know when you get there.
So you know when you get there, number one, sure.
Keeps you on track.
Keeps you on track. And why is that important in a nonprofit setting?
Because people go off the rails.
Yes, and also there's a lot of turnover. You have boards rotating off. You have staff moving in and out. You have volunteers who come in with great intentions, and they might decide to turn everything upside down on its head because they have a great idea. Maybe their idea is great, and maybe it should be considered as a strategy, but by saying there's a plan, that helps. I love a strategic plan for two main reasons. One is it serves as a mediator. I've spent the better part of 15 years serving as an executive director of a nonprofit, and I can tell you when I walk into board meetings and my board chair or a board member says, we have a great idea. I cringe. And then it's usually something like, we were thinking if we do this huge event, and then I cringe again. Because in the professional world, we know that events are not the most productive ways to bring in dollars. But when a board that has limited fundraising experience thinks about raising awareness and dollars, events are the first thing that come to mind. The strategic plan allows me to say, that sounds like a fabulous way to raise awareness, but our resources have already been allocated for this year. We've said that we're going to do an annual event, and if we schedule a second event, that takes away from the fact that we have a signature event. Also, staff time is already committed to point A, B, and C on the strategic plan. What would you have us take off our plate to become event coordinators? When you phrase it that way, we're happy to do it. What would you like us to not do? Do you want us to skip our donor meetings? Do you want us to not write that $50,000 grant that we have a good shot at getting so that we can plan an event that people may or may not come up to on the fly? It puts things in perspective. So it becomes the mediator, and it becomes a point of consensus for the board and the staff that oftentimes might disagree on how you should get where you're going. The other thing is it's a great fundraising tool. How many donors want to invest in a sinking ship? None. Donors want to fund your impact, not your existence. They want to fund your impact, not your existence. When you can show that you have a plan to impact your community and the population you serve, you're more likely to get the donors' dollars in your bank account. So having a version of your strategic plan that is donor friendly is really important. So we've talked about this being a live document. Most people have this kind of it looks like a business plan, it's put in a 3-ring binder, but you see hospitals and school systems, if you walk in, I walked in last week to my daughter's after school program, and those of you who know the school systems and daycares know that they use the 5-star system. All of us know kind of what a 5-star is. I mean, you do Facebook reviews. Well, on the wall it said 5 stars, and I was like, when did this daycare become 5 stars? So I stopped, and really what it was is they had taken the 5 pillars of the school system strategic plans and put them into 5 stars. It made me stop, it made me look, and as a parent it made me say, wow, the school has a plan for growing this community and the education of my daughter, but it was a 1-page summary with the pictographs and illustrations. So when you have the strategic plan, how do you present it in such a way that donors get excited? So for those of you who are saying, when should we do it? There's always a great time to do it. If it's the creation of a new organization, you might not be ready for a 5-year plan. You might need an initial startup 1-year transition plan. And as you build your board, then look towards a more comprehensive strategic plan at the end of year 1 or moving into year 2. You might want to be, if you're exploring a new project, you're expanding your campus, you're doing something that's above and beyond the normal, you might want to reevaluate or create a strategic plan and looking at different time frames. I personally am a fan for small organizations of a 3-year plan, but looking forward 5 to 10 years. Lots of people made plans and then the recession hit 2007-8.
Would you say that again? Your 3-year plan, but looking toward?
Yes, the details. A lot of organizations get bogged down with the strategies and the activities to accomplish each goal. So we typically like to focus on a 3-year plan that is very detailed, but that 3-year plan are stepping stones towards a 5 or a 10-year plan. It's kind of like going to college. If you have a child that's in elementary, middle school, you're saying, you need to make good grades now. Read to achieve. A 3rd grader's more likely to graduate successfully from high school if they can read by 3rd grade. So that's contributing to college. So you're not really focusing on it, like telling them you have to get into college. You're focusing on that one step, but the end goal is college. So just as your organization may be focused on that 1 task or 2 tasks or getting this donor base, you're looking towards the future, and those are stepping stones along the way. If you're too short-sighted and say we're only looking at 3 years, it blindsides you if you decide, wait a second, we missed amazing opportunities. So look ahead, but don't get bogged down into very specific details, because life changes, your community changes, and the resources change that you're going to have at your fingertips in a 5-year period. And then who should be involved? Absolutely your board of directors, absolutely your staff, your volunteers, your clients, donors and stakeholders, and if you need a facilitator, a facilitator. These are just key people. If you are going to be working with the city or county government, or you have other community partners, you cannot sit in a closed room and expect to create a successful strategic plan. Recently, we had a client call us and say, we need some help with a strategic plan. We said, absolutely, what can we do for you? We have a 2-hour board retreat scheduled for this coming Saturday, and we would like for you to come to do some planning. I thought we were going to discuss what a strategic plan was. They wanted a completed plan in 2 hours. So we say, okay, there's a lot more that goes into this, and how can you make a plan for your organization's future without taking into consideration anything else? The government grants tax-exempt status to an organization, not an individual. So when someone creates a nonprofit, it's because the vision is greater than that one person, and the organization essentially becomes a community location. So why would you negate the opportunity or deny the opportunity for community members and stakeholders to participate in the process? It just doesn't make sense. How do you know if you need an outside facilitator? How many of you feel like you could run this process on your own? One would be, is this the first time you've done a plan? Have you ever created a plan? You might not want to try tackling it solo if it's the first time. If you had a strategic plan before, but it was not successful, for whatever reason, there had to be a reason. You need to be able to evaluate that and say, okay, was it because it wasn't articulated? Was it because it wasn't in the right hands? Why was it not successful? Will a facilitator help us create a more successful plan? Do participants have a wide range of differing views? conflict resolution tends to be one of the greatest things that we see the need for in nonprofits. People come with different viewpoints. It is impossible for a person to be a neutral facilitator yet an active participant in the conversation. So while I do facilitate strategic planning processes for organizations across the country, I have never facilitated one for the organization I serve because it does not allow me to be neutral. I could choose to present information that is my bias, and I'm not opening the floor for everyone else's. So it is not always wise to have someone who's a very vocal participant in your organization to believe that they can honestly facilitate a neutral environment. And then, has anyone else done this successfully? You may have a community member. I know in Morganton we have a specific community member that's amazing at this, that he's brought in to do it, and he knows the communications. He knows the communication styles, he knows the organization. So he's a great fit. So even though he's in the community, he's not completely tied into the organization, but he has background knowledge on the community and the people we serve, so he makes a great fit for some of those groups. And then we also want to make sure that people can share their opinions without criticism. So it provides a really neutral environment. If you said yes to any of those things, you probably need a facilitator. And it doesn't mean you have to pay big dollars necessarily. Somewhere you might be able to find facilitators of all shapes and sizes, but make sure that they have a background and that they have experience facilitating this for your organization. Now, some of you who do the strategic planning process, who in here facilitates strategic planning? Which process do you prefer? Do you look at it goal-based, issue-based, or organic? What is the difference?
We're depending on you to define that.
So if you look at a goal, so I ran an after-school program for many years, and the goal was to increase academic performance of youth. So if I'm looking at a goal, I want to increase college readiness or academic performance of the youth, that's going to be a goal. And all the strategies and everything that we implement and that we outline are going to be reaching steps on the ladder to reach that goal. There might be a social justice issue. There might be something else that is going on. You don't necessarily know what the future is going to look like if that changes, but you can describe it. You may not be able to say every person in the community is going to accomplish X, Y, or Z, something measurable, but you could say our community is going to be more welcoming, more inclusive. There might be something related to an issue. So an issue might be just that, an issue, whether it's racial disparity, whether it is access to education. You could focus on an issue and move towards resolving that issue. And finally, there's an organic process. This is more of a process that's a membership-based model. So let's say that we have a giving circle, and we are going to do a plan, but the type of giving we do depends on kind of a vote, and we have a membership program. Would it be better to ditch the mic and try to shout? Let me try this. Can everyone hear me this way?
Yeah.
Okay. That's not working well for me. All right. So the organic process is typically, I mean, in Europe and other places, you're going to see this. They'll sit around tables, and it might be that I give you a table, and I'm going to say, what in this room is of importance to you? Let's map it out on this table, and over here, you all might have a totally different viewpoint on what's important, and it's more of a membership model. And it can change as the members change. So you're not going to say, we're going to focus on academic performance of youth, because that's not the overriding mission of the organization. It might be that it's a philanthropy group, a giving circle, or another type of organization. Does that make sense? So, yes.
Can I just throw in, again, about having a facilitator? The truth is that a good facilitator actually does a quick analysis and development audit in order to come up with where the strategic plan needs to go.
Absolutely.
And so that's part of what you're getting. And so that I think all three of those points are really good points to look at, but just understand that there are things that you don't see that an outsider will come in and immediately pick up on and include in the overall mix.
And the advantage of the facilitator is we incorporate a lot of these processes in. You don't just say we're going to do issue-based or we're going to do a goal-based. You might have one thing that is goal-based and another that is we want to change the landscape of our community. But you might start out the process in your pre-planning doing some round circle, organic processes to see what's on everyone's hearts, minds, and priorities. So it can be a blended process, but these are kind of the 3 ways to tackle goal setting. You don't necessarily have to adopt one for your strategic planning method, but these are 3 ways to adopt goal setting strategies. Are you ready? All right, so you've got a handout. And on one side you see pre-strategic planning checklist, and on the back you see a strategic planning checklist. This is just...
didn't go to the back.
Someone didn't get it back. Maybe you got an original. You might get them. I'm not going to read this to you. This is really a tool because I wasn't sure where everyone is in the process. And if you look on the slide, and this is going to be going out to you, you'll see Funding for Good has a very interactive website. It can be overwhelming because it's so much information, but there's something for everyone. On the top of the Funding for Good website, you're going to see a tab that says free stuff. Imagine what's under that tab. Free stuff. It used to say resource library, and people would ignore it because they thought it would be boring. So we changed it to free stuff. You're going to see both of these under general resources. You can take the Funding for Good logo off and put your own organization's logo. You can tweak it. Everything under that free stuff tab is in a Word document. So there is a spreadsheet for goal setting, and it has columns. It's a really nifty one that I modified from a state grant that I used to write a lot, and I just liked the format, so it's modified. And it says sample goals and objectives. You can use that as part of your strategic planning process. I use that with program directors. Anytime I'm managing program directors, I give them that sample goals worksheet and I say, you have the authority to kind of take this program where it needs to go. I would like to see for the next 6 months, what are your goals, your priorities, and it has strategies and activities and the people involved and the resources needed, and it's 1 page. And every program officer I work with is required to fill out 1 page for their program so that we can then say when we go on to the greater strategic planning process that we're considering these kind of programmatic goals and how they fit into the bigger equation. This checklist will get you started so you know, are we ready to start the strategic planning process? If you don't have a vision statement, a mission statement, and you don't really know who you are as an organization or that identity, that's going to be part of your process, or it should be leading up. You could take 6 months, you could take a year planning to plan for your strategic plan. So it does not have to happen. We always hear people saying, I want to do this in a weekend retreat. You don't determine who you are as a person in 1 weekend, and as an organization with lots of perspectives, you can't do that in 1 weekend either. So the visioning process is really important. We're going to break this down. So you have a process in the strategic planning, and one is creating your guidelines. What are we going to do in this process? You know, what are we hoping to accomplish? Are we going to do this in 6 months? Are we going to do this in 4 months? Who are we going to include? It's just going to be kind of the guidelines of the project. And what are going to be the norms? The norms are really important. How are we going to receive and share information? Are we going to send out an official little SWOT analysis? Are we going to do interviews? Are we going to have an open community forum? How are we going to filter and give adequate time to the participants in this process? What are the ways we are going to resolve conflict? If 2 people disagree, you know, are we going to say everyone in the community meeting has 3 minutes on the floor? Is there going to be Robert's Rule of Order in the board meeting? And are there going to be specific agenda items? What are the operating norms for this process? And then how will you resolve those conflicts? Will there be time limits? Will there be side discussions? What is that going to look like for your organization? And when you're looking at timelines, you want to really think that you need a plan for the planning process. So that's your pre-strategic planning. You're going to look at that spreadsheet that I just handed out and say, okay, what do we already have? And if you already have 90% of that, kudos to you. But you're still going to need to engage community members. You're still going to want to see what's going to happen there. And then, are you going to have group strategy sessions? If you want active participation, they need to be on the calendar well in advance, and you need to make sure people have RSVP. And you need to know who should be at those strategy meetings. What if you depend on a key stakeholder or donor? Are they going to be present? Are your projects dependent on the generosity of 1 or 2 or 3 key donors? Are they going to move forward with you? You need to have these conversations. How are you going to start the drafting process? Are you going to have 1 person? Are you going to have a small subcommittee? Is your facilitator going to help draft this? What does this look like? Who's going to edit it? Like, there are too many cooks in the kitchen. There are absolutely too many grammar police in a strategic planning process. I can testify to that. So typically we will put it on a screen. I will take that sample goals and spreadsheet that I mentioned, it's under the free resources, and put it on a screen, and Mandy might be typing and while I'm facilitating, and we're typing in there and we're telling people, don't get bogged down with the words yet. Let's make sure we have the idea. Then we get those ideas down, and then we can wordsmith and say, does this really portray what we want to say? So then once we get the ideas, we can move on to wordsmithing and making sure it sounds great. And then finalizing it, saying, okay, did we put all of our data in here? Did we have our benchmark data? And part of that pre-planning is, do you have benchmark data? I know an organization we worked with recently said, we're going to increase, the board told the staff, we want to increase the participation in this substance abuse program, and it was an inpatient, by 50%. And staff just looked at the board. What is the problem with that? If you don't have benchmark data, you don't know how much increasing. If you only have one person in your program and you're increasing by 50%, that might be very reasonable. But if you have 1,000 or 500, you might not have the space. What do fire codes say? So I used to work with after-school programs, and the board would say, we want to increase or double our numbers. Well, fire code won't allow that, so are you going to get me a new building? If so, if that's a priority to double those children's numbers, then let's talk about expanding our space, and that's a whole nother goal on the strategic plan. So getting your benchmark data and understanding each of your programs is really important. And then finally, approving the process is going to be on the list. Typically when we teach this workshop, it's 3 hours, and there's a whole nother section on all of these, and we go through each of these in detail. We won't have time today. But sharing is the final thing, but it's also the most important. If you don't tell people where you're going and how you plan to get there, they don't know how to join along. You want people to sign up for the trip. You want them to go along for the ride, but they don't know what you're doing. How can they do that? So are you going to do one of those neat little infographics? Are you going to have a press release? Are you going to print it? I was recently serving on a Master Parks committee for our community, and we did a community open house, and we printed up these beautiful kind of banners with the strategic planning process, and we put them across kind of the city hall and one of the meetings we were in, and we had refreshments, and we invited the entire community to come and see the initial process of our strategic planning. And it was visual. We had pictures of the stage and the buildings that we were going to create. We had images of what the Greenway would look like with its expansion. So before you maybe finalize it, you might open it up for the community and say, we're going to give you a sneak peek. What do you think? And have an open house. And this is a great way for donors to come in and get to know your organization, but also to see that you have a plan, and they might be able to contribute to that. The internal and external analysis is extremely important, and we call that SWOT. Everyone knows strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And there's different tools. Different facilitators have different preferred methods of doing this. I personally love anonymous stakeholder interviews because it gives me the opportunity as a facilitator to hear what the community truly believes about the organization that we're serving. And if the director or a board member goes out and asks, people are going to be too afraid to share their opinions. We did this with a group up in New York recently, and I was told by the founder, everyone just loves us. You're not going to hear a negative thing about us because we're the only ones doing this particular program. When I call people, I said I've been contracted by this organization, and I'm a neutral facilitator. I would love your honest feedback. All of your information will be confidential. I will compile it, but your name will not be attached. You mean I can say anything I want and it's anonymous? Oh. I opened the floodgate, and it was painful. The results for the founder were very painful. We heard that it was a toxic environment, that the founder was not allowing the staff to work, and that was creating unnecessary turnover. We heard that the messaging was confusing, and lots of different things that were painful to hear, but they were necessary. And the board had to look at that and say, okay, how do we get this in check? So organizational profiles. You can do interviews in person with the board. I like to sit down with board members and see what their perspective is on the organization and what they see as strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then internal conversations with staff, volunteers, stakeholders. There's lots of different ways to do this. With City Parks, we did a community forum, and we had little gadgets and people could vote. If your organization is small, you might be getting this feedback throughout the year through surveys or after client services. So you might incorporate this feedback into another process of client satisfaction surveys throughout the year. Lots of different ways to do this. And at the end of the day, saying, how do we see ourselves? Sometimes we see ourselves differently than the community, and that's hard to hear, but it's true. And sometimes we might think that we're just a struggling little nonprofit, and the community says, wow, can you believe what this group is doing? It's helpful to see our organization through the eyes of the community, and if you don't have a way to secure that information and get that reflected back, it's going to impact your planning. I work with the Presbytery of Western North Carolina. We facilitate a mission in Guatemala, and we recently went to the national conference for all the Presbyterian churches, and we were told that our group here in Western North Carolina is the trendsetter, and that is what everyone across the country in Peace USA is modeling their Guatemala partnerships after. And I thought, well, we kind of feel a little disorganized a lot. We've been working hard to get things organized, but we are a long way from that finish line. But to hear that other people were looking up to us and modeling, it made our board and our group say, okay, how can we create and streamline this process so we can share it versus just keeping this all to ourselves? So it really was an eye-opening experience for us to recognize how others see the work that we're doing. So how does the community see us? How would you ask this? How many of you think you have a good idea of how your community views you? Where do you get that image from? How do you?
Where do I get it from? People talk all the time.
Give it on. So you're going to get the personal feedback, and that's great. What about your community partners? What about people that don't partner? One group of people that never tend to get asked questions is the people we don't partnership with. I typically ask, who could or should you be partnering with that you don't? And then I call those people up and say, why don't you partner with this group? And they're usually pretty enlightening conversations. So don't just look at who you're partnering with, who could and should you partner with, and why is that not happening? Is it because conversations were never initiated? Is it because you view each other as competitors versus collaborators? What does the community see? Because a lot of times there's misconceptions. I used to have businesses say, well, we don't work with you because you're competing with us. There is more than enough work to go around, so we might actually be able to collaborate, and if we can just break down that mindset. The visioning process is one of my favorite. It's really neat to see organizations kind of take all these ideas of who they think they are and be able to articulate it in a sentence or two. We always tell them your mission statement should pass the t-shirt test. It should be able to fit on a t-shirt, and you should be able to read it without a magnifying glass, and it should capture you. Charity Water has a really great mission. They say Charity Water is bringing safe drinking waters to it's like underserved communities or nations across the world. So you know they're bringing what? Safe drinking water to whom? Underdeveloped or underserved nations where? In the world. Now if I want to know more and how they do that, I get to connect to their mission, but it gets my interest. But when you say, our organization is doing blah, 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 and it goes on and you can't say it in 2 minutes without repeating it, then that's a problem with the messaging. So the vision and mission statement might be clear in the board's eyes or the organization's eyes, but it's not being communicated. The message has not been presented in a way that the community is grasping. So you want to make sure that you do that during the strategic planning process or right before, so that you can say, okay, this is our brand, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, and this is how it ties in. Your core values cannot be left behind, because businesses all have those core values. And yes, we may say honesty and integrity and things like that, but you have other values as well. If you are a faith-based organization, you're going to have a very strong core value in one area. If you are, a humanitarian organization that is, doing something else, you may have a totally different one. And we may overlap with other organizations, but what is it that drives your organization? What are those core values? And are you going to take time to focus on evaluating and sharing and creating that? We see lots of people just want to throw out their beginning or end of the year brochures and don't take the time to really reflect on the message that they're sharing. So strategic planning process is a really, really great way to start this. And then who we are and where we want to go. Goal setting, I mentioned the free stuff. I'm not going to get into this today as far as setting the individual goals, but this is a great little worksheet. Like I said, get on there, print it off, use it for your programs. It's also what we use a lot of times for the strategic planning document. Obviously, you have your headers and you have your organizational history and your analysis, but when you're trying to outline your goals and objectives, this little format is really nice. That was unusual. Let's get it back down there. It looks like the computer froze up. Okay, there's going down. Almost. All right, we're back on. Perfect. So the goal setting, like I said, can go through different processes, but before you ever sit down and try to have a conversation with the board, I would encourage you as executive directors, program directors, to fill out that one page with your program staff. They need to be able to say, this is what we want to do, here are our current obstacles, or here are our current opportunities. So that's raised with the board well before you sit down in a planning session. This needs to be going out and shared at board meetings. So ideas for implementation. This is where people tend to struggle. Someone asked me today before we started, how do you make sure people actually do it? How often do you think you should be reviewing a strategic plan? Okay, so if I had a goal to, let's say I'm the membership director, wasn't someone in here a membership director? And the strategic plan says I'm going to increase our membership by 1,200 people a year. And that's 100 people a month, 100 people, right? And I wait till the end of the year to report that I'm only at 300. Do I have any time to make any positive strides? No, I have to report failure because I only waited till the end of the year to report that. But if I'm a staff member and I'm the membership director and I say, these are my strategic plan updates as part of my staff report, our end goal is 1,200. I'm currently at 400. I'm at the end of the second month of the year, so I'm actually ahead. Or at the end of the third quarter, I'm on track. So putting it in perspective, our board reports and our staff reports to the board should be including our progress towards the goals, because at the end of the day, staff are hired to be implementing the work plans, right? It's our job as staff to implement the work plans, and the board cannot properly oversee and govern if they're not being presented the information. Board members have 3 judicial duties: duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Duty of care means board members are going to make informed decisions that are in the best interest of the organization, and if staff hasn't reported, hey, this is where I am on this goal, board members can't make informed decisions. We can't say, let's modify this plan, let's tweak this capital campaign, because they're not being presented with all the information. So, ideas for implementation. These can be staff get-togethers. This could be board and staff get-togethers and having conversations about the strategy, saying, wait a second, we said we were going to get X number of kids in this program. How are we actually going to do that? Are we going to have an open house? Are we going to give scholarships out? What does that look like? And then actually in your staff report saying, this is the action plan, or these are the activities we're doing to accomplish this goal. So maybe I haven't accomplished the goal in first quarter. Maybe it's not a membership number that I can report on, but I can certainly report, have I completed the activities that are going to lead to the successful completion of these goals. Does that make sense? Report every single month. Now, if you have 12 staff members and you're not going to get to it, choose one to highlight, but everyone should be reporting at least quarterly, and that will kind of keep things moving. And then reviewing and evaluating, you might say, okay, we're hearing the reports each month, but we're going to make a quarterly review and say, do we need to tweak this? Did something else happen? Did we get moved out of our space, whatever that might be? And let's go from there. I want to make sure. And then distribution, we've talked a little bit about. Get it out in the community. Press releases, how is that going to impact? Put it in your end of the year letter, like that one page. I'm talking one page little snapshot. When you send out your year-end report or your newsletters, slide it in there as an insert that people can put on their fridge, or they can, and you put it in your donor packets. When you go visit businesses for corporate sponsorship, when you go visit individual donors, you take that with you, and it keeps it in the forefront of everyone's mind. So we're almost out of time. Any questions? Was this helpful at all? I feel like I sped through a 3-hour presentation.
That's
Yes.
a really good point.
Yeah, one question I had, Marie, about what you were saying towards the beginning about budgeting. You said a zero budget is the thing of the past.
Yeah.
And a lot of the grant proposals that we submit, at least traditionally, they've wanted a zero budget. And so can you say a little bit more about that? Were you talking about when you present to donors or just in general, or yeah?
So I made the comment, donors want to fund our impact, not our existence. If I were to tell you that I am going to be your financial advisor, or I'm going to be paying your household bills for the year, and you're going to go to work and you're going to make $50,000, and at the end of the year you're going to have $0 in your bank account, would you be motivated to go to work? What if your tire needs to be changed, or your floor, breaks? You don't have any kind of cushion. So I've not seen, and I've been writing a lot of grants, I have not seen grants that say we want to see a zero budget. I see grant questions saying, what is your sustainability plan? Sustainability plan means you have an operating revenue or an operating reserve. So at the end of the year, you should be showing a reserve. A lot of people have the mindset of, I'm not going to be a successful fundraiser because I have to show that I'm needy.
That is the mindset of fundraisers, is I need to show that I need the money. No, you're gonna have to show that you're gonna be successful stewards of the money that you're given. You're more likely to see a return on the investment if someone is not desperate. Because if it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you're trying to just get the food and clothes, you can't really focus on that achievement. Well, the same thing in a grant project or a nonprofit development, you can't focus on the end goal if you can't keep the lights on. So your strategic plan should be focused on you should have a fundraising component. And normally I say a strategic plan should have a program component. It should have a capacity building component, like how are you going to build your board and how are you succession planning, your financial component, and the financial component should be a safety net or reserve. Healthy nonprofits should have 3 to 6 months of an operating reserve in the bank. If you have a zero budget, how are you budgeting for an operating reserve? So most best practices say 3 to 6 months in the bank of an operating reserve, so that maybe for a project grant proposal, like for a specific project, you can have a zero budget. Like you want to say, this is what we're going to spend, this is what we're going to raise, that's okay. But for a nonprofit organization, you're not leaving room for any kind of crisis response if you do that.
If you are in the process of considering hiring someone to help you facilitate your strategic planning process, what kinds of questions or what kinds of things would you be asking a potential consultant to help you with that?
Have you done this before?
Well, that would, yeah.
That would be one. But two, what is the approach? Different people have different strategies. I have some colleagues that do all the pre-planning virtually. They have one initial consult and then they come in for a 2 full-day retreat with the board. And it works really well, but there's a lot of work that comes in. Some organizations say, no, I want to do this at our monthly board meetings and it's going to take 6 months. So I think that it's finding a match of someone that's willing to move the process forward in a way that works for your organization. Because if someone says, I'll come in and do a 2-day retreat, but you're not prepared for that, you're not getting the product you need. So I would ask their process, their availability. If you are not finished with the process in 3 months, are they going to cancel your contract and move on to someone else and leave you with an unfinished plan? Or are they going to give you a pre-planning homework task and then work with you through a specified frame? But I would definitely ask what they know about your organization, the communities, the types of strategic planning they've done, and how successful some of those plans have been.
If you have a strategic plan that's ending, say
Yes.
you haven't really worked one out for the next 10 years,
Sure.
How would you do a transitional one? If you're really not ready to do the work on the next 5 years, say, or the work on creating a strategic plan.
And that's going to be the pre-planning. That's going to be a pre-planning because lots of organizations say, oh, wait a second, our plan ends this December and we're supposed to have one in place and it's not going to happen in 3 months. So maybe taking a 1 year, saying we're going to do a 1 year planning process. We're going to talk about what are the key projects that we need to have in place. If you're going to be doing a museum or something with the city parks, you're going to be meeting with city officials. That's not going to happen in 3 months or 4. So I would start saying these are going to be key components of that next plan, whether it's a capital campaign, whether it's increasing staff, whether it's transitioning your board, succession planning. Make a bullet list of the things that you want to accomplish and then say who needs to be involved in this process and what is their availability like. So that you can say, okay, our strategic plan includes a capital campaign, but if we don't have X, Y, or Z, we can't start. So what is the time frame for the thing that's the farthest out? But go ahead and start the pre-planning for the other. But I would say your transition could be appropriate depending on what you're trying to accomplish in the next plan.
And that's something then that you make public, at least internally, so that it guides the process.
Yes.
I guess what I'm saying is it's probably not a good idea to not have a plan.
No, because the thing is I'm working with an organization right now that's in that exact situation, and they're saying we're going to start the planning process next year. Well, what are you doing to plan for the planning process? Because you need the city, or you need the county, or you need so-and-so to be a part of this. So if you have that 10-point planning or this pre-planning process, then you can report at your board meetings, I've made the contacts with the city, I've made contacts with this potential partner, we're in dialogue. So you can start those partnership conversations now, and then you'll have a better idea, yes, they're willing to partner, no, they're not, or yes, these are the conditions of the partnership that will later be included in the plan. But those conversations happen now. So you get those on the books now and say, we're in the transition and we are exploring our partnerships and our planning process, and these are the steps we're taking. So it would be like a 1 year work, I consider it more like a work plan versus a strategic plan. It's more your 1 year work plan.
Kind of along those lines, Marie, with us, I think we're coming up on the end of our 3-year plan with this and I don't know that we have plans, we don't have all this in place to start working on the next one. I'm wondering if this year with our new building and really kind of knowing, well, there's a lot of unknowns, could we use this coming year as a kind of a planning year again for that next?
There's nothing worse than a poorly planned strategic plan.
Right.
A strategic plan is an active document. It is a live document. It will be modified. Just because it's written in stone doesn't mean it's going to stay in stone. So if you try to crank it out there just to have it, you're going to end up modifying so much that it might not have been worth the effort to try to cram and get it all done. It's better to take that planning time and say, these are our long-term goals, is to complete this building, complete this capital campaign, and outline them so that people see that you have a direction and a future, and then you can unveil those strategies and activities over the coming months. And you
Kind of
might
a transitional
yes.
time for us.
We consider that a transition work plan, or what we call the pre-planning period.
Right, okay.
That was some great questions.
In interviewing a facilitator, do you feel like that because it's a facilitation process that you don't have to necessarily know or have worked in the particular industry, or can it just be nonprofits in general, or what is your opinion on that?
A good facilitator will know how to ask open-ended questions that will get responses, but it is always helpful to have a working knowledge of the field. So I would definitely say someone that has a working knowledge of the field that you're in would be helpful. We've worked with hospitals, we've worked with small nonprofits, Christian schools, things like that, but we tend to bring in people, the experts, to work with us if it's someone, like if it's specific goal planning. A facilitator's job is not to create the goals for the organization, it's to ask the questions to make sure that the goals are SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, relevant, and timely. So a facilitator will be working to get the group to speak and verbalize those SMART goals. But background knowledge is helpful. Any facilitator should send you a proposal after your conversation and say, this is what I'm proposing to offer, this is the way I would achieve a strategic planning process with you. So when I send it out to a client, I'll say we're going to do this in a 3-month or a 6-month process depending on the initial conversation, and it will include basic processes, basic timelines that have some flexibility, as well as a quote for the fees for service.
Thank you.
How much detail are you looking for in the strategic plan? Who should be able to read it?
Your sample goals and objectives, it should be something like, we plan on increasing the number of high school graduation students in our community through after-school program, if that's your focus. And you should be able to say how many students a year minimum are you wanting to serve, and what are the end goals if that's a programmatic goal. But your other goals might be capacity building, which means building a qualified board, that you're going to implement a board recruitment, training, orientation, and leadership process. So you might have very small details, like you're going to do that process, but then a subcommittee or staff or special people will say, what does that process look like? So you're not going to outline every process. You're going to say, we're going to work on board development through identifying and completing a board recruitment retention process, and then another group will come in and present those strategies at a later meeting.
Sorry, I keep...
And I can stick around for a minute or two if people need, because I know that our time is
Yeah, if anybody else
ended.
wants to...
So we're going to end right now. I'll stand up here for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I hope this was helpful.
So go back and register for
And ED, and we'll see you back up here in December.
ED